This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
Rabbi, so good morning. Just learned something very important, which is relevant to the upcoming Yom Tif, and that is the Torah Sheba'al Peh, about the oral law, about the prohibition of writing down the oral law. And we begin with the first Mishna in Perkei Avos. It says, Moshe kibel Torah misinai u'mesara li Yoshua. Moshe received the Torah, he gave it over to Yoshua. And what's very difficult with this line is that what does it mean Moshe gave it to Yoshua? Moshe didn't just give the Torah to Yoshua. He taught the whole Torah to all of Klal Yisrael. If you look in the Gemara in Erevin on Daf Nun Daled, we just had in the Daf, right? Torah Abanon, Ketzad Seder HaMishna. First Moshe taught Aaron, then he taught Aaron Ubanov, then he taught the Zakenim, and then he taught all of Klal Yisrael.
We had the Shiur,
right? And then correct. And then Aaron taught everyone, then the Shnei Banav taught, and then the Zakenim taught. So what does it mean that Moshe gave the Torah to Yeshua? He gave it over to all of Klal Yisrael. And here we come to an amazing passage from the Sefer Medrash Shmuel. Medrash Shmuel is written by Rav Shmuel D. Uzida, one of the Gurei Ha'arizal, one of the students of the Ari. And he writes that although the Torah was given over to all of Klal Yisrael, but who's in charge? In other words, who has mastery over the Torah? So, question is, what does that mean? Who has mastery over it?
Whoever learns.
Everyone who learns. The explanation he gives is, who controls the Torah? Who determines what the Torah would say in each situation? What does that mean? Says the Medrash Shmuel, on the second line, in number 2.
Don't we have a judicial system that Yisro told Moshe to set up and that was in place?
So, but there, in terms of interpreting the Torah, to have the ultimate say in terms of what does the Torah say in this situation, it's dependent on one person. Listen to this. If you always do what the Torah says, what that means is, if a person is always going to do, the Torah says this, so I'm going to do this, hu avel gamor, it's a avla, it's a bad thing. You can't just do, what does the Torah say? L'chein amru, that is why Chazal say, Leicharva Yerushalayim ela al shadanu badin Torah. You know why Jerusalem was destroyed? Because they kept the Torah. They kept the Torah. Because they did what the Torah says. What? Yerushalayim was destroyed because they did what the Torah says? Yeah. Well, if you're going to be a stickler, that, the Torah says this, so I have to do this, and then now the Torah says this, do that. No. The Torah has to have, Rabbi Sai, listen to this, it's going to sound almost heretical, but we're going to see what it means. The Torah has a certain fluidity. It has a certain adaptability and flexibility. Not for me to say what to do, and not for you to say what to do, but for the Gadol Hadar to say how the Torah should apply in certain unique situations. Yerushalayim was destroyed because, it says, the Gemara says to do this, the Gemara says to do that. No, you don't always do what it says, so to speak. You have to do what the person who Hashem has given the authority of Torah to, what he tells you the Torah wants you to do.
So in every door we have a person like that?
It's not the same person.
Maybe yes, maybe.
We have Machlokes Tanon.
We may not. But at least in the beginning periods of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, the Torah was given specifically to one individual. For him to...
Yerushalayim was destroyed 19 times, 19 separate times.
So each time there's probably a different cause and a different reason, but this is referring specifically to the Bayis Sheni. So what does this mean? Let's read what he says. He says, Ki b'ktsas hazmanim, there are some times, Roy sheyasa bezdin hagadol, it is fit for bezdin hagadol to act, Kefi hayra asha, according to the needs of the times, Hefech ma sheyavai b'Torah, the opposite of what it's brought in the Torah. Kamasha Kasaf, like the pasuk says, Eis lasis Lashem, when there's a time to act for God, Heifiru Terasecha, break the Torah. Asher haratzin bazeh. What this means is, Ki mitzad ha'eis, there are certain times, Yesh lasos kavod Hashem, you need to honor Hashem, Shetufar Torasai, to break the Torah. For instance, in the writing down of the Torah Sheba'al Peh, it was usher to write down the Torah Sheba'al Peh. But in order to do for God, they had to break the Torah. This is not for every regular person to do. Only a unique individual. When the Mishna says in Pirkei Avos that Moshe kibel Torah u'mesara leYeshua, you know what Mesara means? It was given to him to do as he wants to it. Like it says, Al yamin shu smal v'al smal shu yamin. Kifi hazman v'hamakim.
So Yeshua could have said to Bnei Israel, I'm making it, okay, I'm giving a heter to Chazer.
Yeah, if Yeshua didn't want it, only as a Hayrasha, not permanently. But as a temper like Eliyahu on Har HaKarmel, he allowed a certain prohibition to be violated for a specific need, for a specific time. It's given over to the Gadol Hadar to do as he wants. Now listen to this.
We had Takanos, the Rabbanan, that apply for thousands of years.
No, not to break the Torah. Not to break the Torah. Here it's saying that it was given over to an individual. Lahafer, right? Says the Medrash Shmuel, this is what we want to get at too. V'zeh achas mehasibois. This is his concluding words. This is one of the reasons. Lama lo nichtava Torah shebal peh. Why Hashem did not want the oral law to be written. Aval nitna lebezin hagadol lasos k'moshe yirtzeh. It was given to each bezdin to do what they wanted. In other words, you know why Hashem said, don't write the oral law? Because the oral law is not black on white. It's not set in stone. It's not rigid. It had a certain fluidity, it had a certain adaptability, it had a certain flexibility. Not what I think and what you think and what this rabbi thinks. It's dependent on Yehoshua ben Nun, who gave it to the Zakenim, who gave it to Hillel and Shammai, to specific individuals. That's the concept. The Bezdin Hagadol needed to interpret the Torah kafi hazman v'hamakan. Again, this is a very dangerous concept. This is a very challenging concept. We're not saying like the Tzedukim. We believe in the Torah Shebal Peh, but the Torah Shebal Peh had a certain fluidity to it, and I'm going to give you a prime example. Sefer Rus. Okay, a beautiful Sefer Rus. I'm going to give you a prime example. Right? We know Machon and Mikilyon, they marry Wahu, Rus and Arpa. Machon and Mikilyon die. Rus returns back with Naomi. Now, there are two individuals who could possibly perform Yibam to Rus. One is Pliny Almaini, and one is Boaz. So, Boaz quickly goes to the Bezdin. Uhu Boaz, Allah Hasha, right? He goes to the Bezdin. And he approaches the Goyal, look at number 3. Vayomer HaGoyal, the Goyal says, Lo yuchal ligoli. I can't do it. Pen ashchas es nachalasi. I'm going to destroy my inheritance. Ga'alacha, you redeem, eskulasi, kilo yuchal ligal. Says Rashi, what does the Goyal mean I can't marry her? Because maybe I'll destroy my children. Zari, my children. K'may nachlas Hashem banim. The word nachala refers to one's children. In other words, what the Goyal is saying is, I can't marry this woman because she's from which nation? Mayav. And if I marry her, my children are going to be what? Pasol lavai b'kahal. I'm going to be destroying my children, so therefore I can't marry her. Ask the Brisker Rav, such a beautiful kasha. You know, this is a classic kasha, the Grizz, the Brisker Rav.
But wouldn't that have applied to Boaz too?
Well, what we're going to learn is, Boaz had just paskened Mayavi v'loy Mayavis.
Right.
And listen to the words of the Goyal. I can't do it.
You do it.
Because I don't want to ruin my children. Ask the Brisker Rav. He should have said much better. I can't do it because I can't marry her because she's a shiksa. She's a Mayavi. What's he worried about the children? He can't, if he's worried, Mayavi, v'gam Mayavis, Yavai v'kal Hashem, then aside from the fact his kids are going to be puzzled, he's doing an Avera.
Didn't we just say that Boaz said that Moab?
Yeah, but this Plenty of Money obviously did not agree with Boaz, right?
But is he the Gadol Hadar that had the right to do?
He's the Gadol Hadar, but this...
He has the right to...
Fine, but he's not accepting it. He's not, this Plenty of Money is not accepting that psak. So if he's not accepting the psak, what's he worried about his kids? He should be worried he's eating chazer. He's not going to marry this woman. Why does he say, Penashchas es nachalasi? Ask the Brisker Rav. He should say much better. He should ask, I can't marry her. Says the Brisker Rav an amazing thing. The Gemara tells us In Masechta Yevamos, Daf Ayin Vav. Shel sees a boy named David, and David takes up the challenge, right? Goliath said, why should the Philistines go to war against Israel? Right? Why should the Philistines go to war against Israel? Let's make a deal. Whoever beats me will be your slaves. And if I beat you, then you'll be our slaves. So, for 40 days, Goliath mocked the Jewish people that no one was taking him up to the challenge. Until this little boy, David HaMelech, says, I'm up for the challenge. So Shel asked, who's this kid? I don't know who this kid is. So the Gemara asks in Yevamos in number 5, we don't have time to read it, the Gemara asks that Shel asks Avner, the general, who is this kid? So the Gemara says, Shel doesn't know who David is? We find elsewhere Shel loved David. Shel made him his arms bearer. So what's he asking? Who is this kid? Elamai Shel is asking, who's the kid's father? No, Shel knew very well about Yishai. Yishai was someone who wherever he went, he was followed by 600,000 people. Says the Gemara, what Shel wanted to know was, is this kid, he knew he was from David HaMelech, he knew he was from Yehuda. Is he from Peretz or is he from Zarach? If he's from Peretz, he could be a king. Peretz implies Paratz Geder, he could act as a king. Or if he's from Zarach, he'll just be distinguished. So what happened? What happened? Why was Shel so interested in David? Because he saw David put on his armor, and we know Shel was taller than everyone else, and it fit David miraculously. So he knew something was special. So comes along Doik Vadoimi, and he says, before you ask if he could be a king or not, you know what you should ask? Is he worthy to come B'Kahal Yisrael? So Shel says, what do you mean? Why would he not? Why would he be Asur Lavi B'Kahal?
He has more of in his heritage.
Right, because he comes from Rus HaMoyaviyah. Comes along Avner Ben Er, he says, no, but we have a drasha, Amoini v'lay Amoinis Mayavi v'lay Mayavis. So Daik says, oh yeah? So why don't we say the same thing? Mamzer v'lay Mamzeres. You can't marry a Mamzer, but a girl who's a Mamzeres you could marry. So he said, no, Mamzer means Mumzar, a foreign impurity, men and women. So Daik said, no, what about Mitzri? Maybe you should be able to marry a Mitzri v'lay Mitzris. So Avner said, no, there's a reason why we're darshaning it like this. Because why is Ammon and Moav Asur Lavi B'Kahal? Because they didn't come to us, B'lechem u'v'mayim. Who usually brings the food? Men. Women don't bring the food. So Daik says, what are you talking about? Of course we're tsanuim, but the men should have brought to the men, and the women should have brought for the women. Avner Ben Er is speechless. He has nothing to say. He doesn't know how to answer Doyeg's tainus. So Shel says, you know what? Take it to the Beis Medrash. We forgot the halacha. Let's see what they say in the Beis Medrash. Fine. So they go into the Beis Medrash and they ask, what's the halacha? Could you marry an Amoinis? Could you marry a Mayavis? In the Beis Medrash they said, Mayavi v'loy Mayavis lo yavai b'Kahal Hashem. They said that you're allowed to marry a Mayavis. So Doig says, what do you mean? What about Mamzeres? What about Mitzris? And this and that? Nobody knew the answer. Until a man...
Boaz was the Rosh Sanhedrin.
No, this is hundreds of years before. This is hundreds of years before Boaz. This is in the times of David HaMelech. Right? David, holiest. Alright?
No, David came from Rus.
Oh, excuse me, correct. David came from Rus, yes.
Yeah. So Boaz was the Rosh Sanhedrin.
So you're asking good.
They had to know already. They had to know that he know that Moab.
Very good. Excellent question. Why did they not know the halacha about Mayavi v'lay Mayavis? Boaz the Gadol had already paskin Mayavi v'lay Mayavis lo yavai b'Kahal Hashem. Let's see. Until a man by the name of Amasa, who, by the way, was the son of Avigail, said, he took out his sword, and he says, whoever doesn't listen to this halacha will be pierced by the sword. I have the following tradition from Shmuel Haramasi. Amoini v'lay amoinis, Mayavi v'lay Mayavis. And the Gemara asks, is he believed? But a Talmid Chacham that darshans something that's relevant to him, and this was relevant to Amasa because Amasa's mother Avigail was from Mayav. If a Talmid Chacham paskins about something, if it's before the incident happened, we'll accept his halacha. But if it's while the incident is happening, we don't accept the halacha. So Gemara says in this case we accept what he says. Why? Because we could have checked it because Shmuel and his bezin was still around. Okay, fine. So Rabbi Yosef is asking, very good question. What's the Gemara saying? This whole shakla v'tarya between Shel and Doeg and Amasa and Avner. Could you marry a Moaviyah? Could you not marry a Moaviyah? Kfar Hoira Hazakin, Boaz, who's a Gold of Hadar, already paskind Moavi v'loy Moavis. Says the Brisker Rav, you know what you see from here? You see from here a very important concept. That if a Bezdin issues a halachic ruling based on a drasha, then that's their personal halachic ruling for their time. And there's nothing saying that a later Bezdin cannot come along and darshan differently and have a different psak. The later Bezdin is not greater. They don't have to be greater. When there's a matter of drasha, when it's a matter of exegesis, when it's a matter of the 13 hermeneutical principles, right? Then we don't say Ein Bezdin Yachal Avato Divrei Bezdin Chaver Ad She'Gadu Men B'Chacham Minyan. Then we say it's up to each generation to determine what's the halacha in terms of deriving from a drasha, from the Yud Gimel Midos Shatar Nidreshes Behem.
They don't have another drasha, they can't argue.
Yeah, they would have to darshan differently. But if they see that you could darshan differently, the fact that Boaz paskin one way, good for him. But Doeg has a strong kasha now. Doeg is a Gadol Hadar. Doeg feels that it's a wrong drasha. How could you darshan Mayavi v'loy Mayavis, then darshan the same for Mitzri, then darshan the same for Mamzer? And don't give me this business with Tsunuim, because men could bring to men and women could bring to women. Until Amasa comes along and says the following: I didn't get it from a drasha. This is not a drasha over here. This is halacha l'Moshe Misinai. This is a specific tradition that Hashem told Moshe Rabbeinu, Mayavi v'loy Mayaves. So in other words, and the Griz brings this from the Rambam, that there are two types of Torah Sheba'al Peh. There are two types of oral law. One type of oral law is what you derive through a specific methodology, and that is dependent on each generation, however they see fit to darshan. And a later generation could come along and argue on an earlier generation, and the Rambam says that explicitly in Hilchos Mamrim, Parak Beis Halacha Aleph. It's on your sheet in number 12. The Rambam says, Bezdin Hagadol, Shadarshu Biachas Min HaMidos. If the Bezdin Hagadol darshans with one of the Midos, Kafi Mashanira Beineim, according to what it sees fit in their eyes, Shadin Kach, V'danu Din, if they judge a judgment, B'yama Achrein Bezdin Achin, or another Bezdin comes along, V'nir Loi Tamachar, Listar Oisar Din, Harei Zeh Soiser V'dan, Kafi Mashayira Be'enav. They do what they see fit. Ask the Kesef Mishnah, but it says in Idyos, they need to be greater in Chachma, they need to be greater in Minyan. No, that's talking about other matters of Psak. But when it comes to derivations through your Gimel Midah Shatar Nidreshes Bahem, every Bezdin could do what they see fit.
But this is only now Bezdin. When we started the Shiur, we talked about Gadol Hadar.
So the Gadol Hadar, and then later it was given over to the Bezdin Hagadol. Even the Medrash Shmuel pointed that out.
So if we don't have a Bezdin, this axiom doesn't apply?
If you don't have that individual or that Bezdin Hagadol, no, we'll see. No, it doesn't apply anymore, really. It doesn't. But let's just elaborate further. What?
What was Kesef Mishnah's point?
The Kesef Mishnah asked that doesn't the Bezdin have to be greater in Chachma Minyan?
Right.
Now when it comes to derivations through drasha. So says, very important, says the Brisker Rav, beautiful, this is great, listen to this. Says the Brisker Rav, this Goyal, this Pliny Almoni, he's a smart guy. He knows exactly what Boaz paskin. Boaz paskin, Mayavi, v'loy Mayaviyah. And therefore it was 1,000% permitted for him to marry Ruth. But you know what he's worried about? He's worried about exactly what happened. Yes, Boaz paskin, but who's to say that in the next generation the Bezdin will come along and say, Boaz paskin this way, he was wrong, we paskin a different way. So he was not worried about his own personal Aveira. For him it wouldn't be a sin. His Chacham paskin. He was worried about his children and his grandchildren. Who's to say that a later Talmid Chacham will come along and say that Mayavi v'gam Mayavi lo yaveh b'kal Hashem?
And Boaz wasn't worried about that. The same thing would apply to him.
So why was Boaz not worried about that? And why Taka, how was Amasa able to defeat Doeg? Because Amasa said this is not derived through your Gimel. It's halacha l'Moshe Misinai. Boaz knew this is not a matter of drasha Mayavi v'lay Mayavi. It's halacha l'Moshe Misinai. The Rambam himself says in number 8 in Hilchos Yisrei Bia, Parak Yud Beis, halacha Yud Ches.
So Ploni Almoni didn't agree that.
No, he didn't know. He didn't realize that. He didn't realize that. Or maybe even...
Boaz would have said it to him, no?
Look at number 8. The Rambam writes, V'ketza dinim. Amoin, what's the din of various groups? Amoin, Umayav, Yisuran, Israelam, Zacharim, V'loy nekevos. Shenemar, Lo Yavai, Amonim, Lo Yavai, Hashem, Behalacha, LeMoshe Misinai, says the Rambam, Shoha'amoini Hazachar V'hamayavi Hazachar Hu Sha'asar La'olam, but not the Amoinis. So very interesting, a very beautiful diak of the Brisker Rav. Pliny Amoni was only worried about his children; he wasn't worried about his own sin. But what we're learning is,
could we make a drasha that that if everything is under control of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, and if David HaMelech came and Shlomo HaMelech came from lineage directly related to a Moaviyah, then it must be halacha Moshe Misena. No, the Malchus based David would never come from a Moaviyah if HaKadosh Baruch Hu didn't say it was okay.
Well, first, at this point, David was not anointed.
No. I'm talking about, you look back later on, and you would say that because this lineage came from a Moaviyah, obviously it must be that HaKadosh Baruch Hu would allow that the...
There is a concept like that if you see the offspring are good, it must be things were okay. But on halachic level, you can't bring halachic proof from who the children are as to the halachic permissibility of a certain act. We have a lot. Let me cover the ground. So this is the illustration of the idea of the Medrash Shmuel, that the reason why the Torah Sheba'al Peh was not allowed to be written down is it had to have a certain flexibility and fluidity, which you see from the Rambam it does, because matters that are governed by drashos are specific to the generation. One generation they could see the need for this. Another generation they could see the need for that. And I just want to point out, and I don't even fully understand it. The Chidah brings down in 3 places I found. In the Sefer Simchas HaRegel. Now there are a few Simchas HaRegels just of the Chidah. There are a few Svarim called Simchas HaRegel from the Chidah. One is his parish on the Haggadah Shel Pesach, and one is his parish on Rus. In his parish on Rus, in number 9, he writes, in the name of the Sefer Yalkut David, who writes in the name of the Shach al Torah. The Shach al Torah is from also one of the Gurei HaRizal, like this. You want to see the fluidity of the Torah Sheba'al Peh? He says like this. Avram Avinu is looking for a wife for Yitzchak. I have a great shidduch, the daughter of Lot. In-house shidduch. Right? What's wrong with them? Lot's basically, he's a mammon. He went off a little bit. Why couldn't Abraham marry off his children to the descendants of Lot? Says the Shach al Torah. Because at that point in history, they darshaned, Moavi, Begam Moavis, Layavei B'Kal Hashem. They were off. At that point in history, the same way the Goya was afraid that even though Boaz Paskin Mutter, he was afraid of what Daig would say later, what Daig said later was actually what the halacha was before.
There had such things as halachas before Matan Torah?
That's what the Shach brings down. That's what the Shach brings down. Now this seems to be not going like what we said, that it was halacha l'Moshe Misinai, that it was permitted, although I don't know, I'm not sure how you reconcile this with that point. But then he adds something further.
What do you mean by...
1 second, then he adds something further. He says, not only was the halacha that Moavi v'gam Moavis lo'yaveh b'kal Hashem in the times of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and that's why they married their descendants to the Bnei Shleit. In the times of Machloin v'Kilyoin, that was also the halacha. In other words, it's not that they weren't sure what the halacha was about Moaviyah and Ammoniah. They knew what the halacha was. They had a tradition from Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Moaviyah lo yaveh b'kal Hashem, and that is why Machloin and Kilyon died. Says the Shach al Torah. Look in the Targum says they died because they married Goyim. They married Goyim, they didn't convert them yet. The Zohar says, Chas v'shalom, 2 Gedolei Hadar should marry Goyim. Shach says no. They converted them. But you know why they died? Because they were still Aser. Because at that point in history, the drasha was, Ma'aviyah, La'yavei B'Kal Hashem.
So
no, what's so right? This is obviously not going, or possibly not going with that.
When did it
so
change?
when did it change?
For what?
Boaz changed the halacha.
How could he do that?
Because we learned from the Rambam, a matter of drasha is dependent on the bezdin of every generation.
They just didn't know it was Allah Moshe Messina. They thought it was Midrasha.
Well, you could say, Reb Zelig, you could say that he knew that
but why did? But he's saying that Machon and Killian died because they married them. Why? Because according to them, they thought the drasha was.
We had the other shit when you think something, right? That was the shit we had.
Okay, possibly.
You think it's us or
Possibly. You need kapara. You need kapara. Right, the Gemara Nazir. Gemara. Okay, Rabbi. So listen to this. Listen to this. So until Boaz came along, even in times of Machon and Killian, the halacha was it's Mayavi v'gam Mayavi lo yavakal Hashem. So Boaz changed the halacha. So what a pella it is that Boaz's nephews, Machon and Killian, they marry this woman, they drop dead. He marries her. He has David HaMelech. How could such a thing be? It's one thing you want to say the halacha changed from one generation to the next generation, but the same woman, she used to be a killer. She used to be, even though Boaz also, that was the end of him after. Right. But and not as an einish. So how could such a thing be? Says the Chida. Even ma'asu habaynim. This woman who the baynim, the Chachmei Yisrael, answered. Look at her. The very next day, she's building Malchus Beis David. That's how it learns Pshat in the pasuk. But again, you see the Chida and the Simcha Sarega, number 9. So you see, Rabbi said this concept. What?
This philosophy give a hechsher the reformer to intermarry.
No, so that's what we're saying. Don't try this at home. It's not for me and you to darshan. It's only the Gadol Adar. It's only the Bezdin HaGadol.
It gives them, they're taking it.
It's a very challenging concept, but
why did Boaz?
What? Oh, okay, good. We're going to get there.
Rabbi, why did Boaz die after?
He was old.
He was going to die anyway. Hashem wanted to give him one last.
We don't know that.
Yeah, he was an old man. Hashem gave him one last leg to procreate. Rabbi Sai. So I heard it suggested. It was not such a simple thing to say.
Rabbi, I have a question. I'm sorry.
Yeah, you want to hang on because I have a lot to do.
Weren't, by the time Machon and Killian, weren't they Gadol Adorim?
Yeah.
Maybe they paskined? That it was no good. That it is good, and that's why they got married.
But we don't find anywhere.
So why did they die?
We don't find anywhere that they darshan that way. We find by Boaz Allah Hashar Vayeshev Sham that he convened 10 people and he darshan the Pirsum. But we don't find Machon made that drasha. They just went ahead and did it. So they were violating the status of what the halach was until then. Okay, Rabbi Sai, there is a question that we just learned from the Rambam that matters of drasha, that if you feel the earlier bezin was incorrect, a later bezin could argue even if they're not greater. So if that's the case, there's a famous question of the Kesef Mishnah that everybody asks, and that is a Kesef Mishnah in Hilchos Mamre Parak Beis Halacha Aleph. Look at number 13. He says, if a later Bezdin could argue on an earlier Bezdin, then why can't an Amoira argue on a Tana? We always know, the Gemara will always ask, on an Amoira, you're against the Mishnah, I have a Bryce against you. Who cares? He darshan differently. A Bezdin, even if they're not as great in stature and in number and in wisdom, they could argue on an earlier Bezdin. Ask the Kesef Mishnah, Taimar, Im Kain Amai Loi Pligi Amoroi Atanoi. Why can't Amoram argue on Tanam? We always find, we ask from Mishnayos on to Amoram. And according to the Rambam that we just learned, later Bezin could argue on an earlier Bezin. So the Kesef Mishnah is forced to be Mechadesh. Ve'efshir loimar, it's possible to say, Shemiyoim Chasimas HaMishnah, once the Mishnah was sealed, and it was redacted, and it was closed, Kimu v'kiblu, the Jewish people accepted and established, Shadoyres Achronim lo yachloik al Rishonim. It's finished.
Can't do it anymore.
Once it's black on, right? You can't argue. What about with the Gemara? V'chein asu gam b'chasimas hatalmud. They did the same thing. Once the Gemara was sealed, then a Rishon, a Goin, a Rambam, the Vilna Gaon, no one could argue on what it says in the Gemara. Why? Shemiyom shenichtam leinitin reshus l'shem adam. There was some kind.
They can interpret it.
Yeah, they can interpret.
And maybe come up with a different result.
They can interpret what the Gemara is saying. But once the Mishnah was sealed, Namara can't argue. Once the Gemara was sealed, a later person can argue. Why? Kimu v'kiblu. there was some kind of consensus of the Jewish people. The Maritz Chiyus also brings down a very interesting sefer called Torah Sanaviyim in the Maimer Loisasar on page Kuftes, that this idea that the Kesef Mishnah writes is already found in the Rambam in his Hakdama to the Yad HaChazak in number 14. The Rambam says the same thing. Second line, number 14. Kol hadvarim shebegemara habavli chayovim kol Yisrael lo lechas b'hem. Anything in Shas you need to follow. We could force people to keep the halachas of the Gemara. Why? There's some kind of consensus that once the Gemara was sealed, that's the final word. The Maratz Chiyus asks, though, he says, "V'ula mi yitain." If only Hashem would help me. Please show me in Shas where it says that when Rebbe codified the Mishnah, all of Klal Yisrael got together and they said Nasa v'nishma to whatever it says in the Mishnah. And then please show me in Shas where it says that when Ravina Ravashi sealed the Gemara, there was some kind of a convention, a Agudah convention, Torah Masorah convention, where everyone got together and they said, I pledge allegiance to the Shas, When did that happen? And the Maritz Chiyus tries to explain this al pi darkai. Chazon Ish writes in a letter that it's not like we did the Chachmei HaShas a favor, or the Chachmei HaMishnah a favor, and we all got together for the purpose of unity to say, yeah, we'll follow the Mishnah, yeah, we'll follow the Gemara. It wasn't just a matter of protocol to keep the unity or to give a certain legal binding to the Mishnah and the Gemara. The Chazon Ish says very simple. The generation after the Mishnah saw themselves vis-a-vis the Chachmei Mishnah, and they saw the dramatic decline that they had compared to the Chachmei Mishnah. They saw that they were no longer in the same ballpark. They saw that it was the end of an era. They recognized their complete unworthiness compared to the Chachmei Mishnah, and it was implicit, it was understood that what the Chachmei Mishnah said was final. It wasn't a matter of practicality, a matter of unity. It was a matter of they understood that they're worthless compared to the Chachmei Mishnah.
There was a sense.
Yeah, they were margish that the Chachmei Mishnah has such a high Ruach HaKodesh that you can't disagree with what they're saying. And then he says likewise for the Gemara. So I once heard another reason why an Amayra can't argue with the Mishnah and why the later Chacham cannot argue with the Gemara. And that is based on what we're learning from the Medrash Shmuel. And that is that while the Torah Sheba'al Peh is still transmitted orally, it's fluid, it's flexible. Every generation could do as they see fit. But once it's black on white, so then it becomes almost like Torah Shebachsav. It's rigid, it's final. So once the Mishnah was recorded, that's like a pasuk in Chumash.
Someone wrote down a psak from Shmuel and Navi and say it's not fluid anymore.
And think about that. So perhaps what we're saying from the Kesef Mishnah is more Oila al Adas. But perhaps what we learned from the Medrash Shmuel gives us a certain understanding of why once something is recorded, it can no longer be adapted. Okay, Rabbi Say. That is one reason that we gave why Hashem did not want Torah Sheba'al Peh to be written down. And what is it? Because once it's written, it's rigid. In other words, let's say we had in writing, Mayavi v'loy Mayavia lo yavi b'kal Hashem. Finished, nobody. Then Boaz would never have been able to marry Ruth. If it would have said in writing, Mayavi v'loy Mayavia, right? Like Boaz Paskind, then Machon Maggid never would have died. And Avram Yitzchak would have been able to marry these children. Hashem wanted the Torah Sheba'al Peh to be fluid, and therefore it was never incorporated into writing until Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi and the Chachmei Mishnah and the Chachmei Gemara. Okay, now we're going to explore.
Hashem wanted it to be static, dynamic.
Yeah.
What right did the Chachmei? What right does anybody have to say that we're now at a stage where it's now static and not dynamic
God
anymore.
was clever enough not to let them know that, but they knew that they could see it.
In other words,
and argue.
well, once the
Then
period,
nobody else is going to become. In that generation, it's one thing, but another generation maybe is going to come up and rise up again.
once the period,
That's chutzpah. To think we're no longer going to have anybody that's going to be able to operate on a dynamic basis.
so Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi recognized that he has to take this chance only because the Torah would have been forgotten completely. And that was the Hashgacha had it, that it was able to be fluid until the Chasimas HaMishnah. Rabbi said, I have a whole topic that I need to get at in the next couple of minutes. One more possible reason, another explanation, Rabbi said, why Hashem did not want the Torah Sheba'al Peh to be written. And that is, we find often in the Gemara, that we'll have a question on a Mishnah, for example, in Be'ah over here, but there are countless examples. We have a Mishnah, and we ask a kasha on the Mishnah, and the Gemara says, good kasha. Chisurei mechsura v'hachi katani. The Mishnah is missing words, but this is what it meant to say. What? I mean, Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi, he's a great man. He knew how to write. The Mishnah is written brilliantly. Why would he leave words out of a Mishnah? Oh, good question. The Mishnah is missing words. I mean, what kind of trick is that? The teacher says, you got the wrong answer. No. Oh, you want the whole answer? I have on a different piece of paper the explanation for my answer on the test. But we find it in countless examples.
Yeah, that's the same reason why the Torah Sheba'al Peh is to use to interpret the Torah Sheba'al.
But why would Rabbi
leave
Yehuda
that door open to continue the same way that generation after generation after generation?
So you're saying to maintain a certain fluidity,
Right.
even after the chasima.
Correct.
Okay, good. We're going to explore another possibility.
What
Okay.
about if the concept changes?
What?
The concept changes by generation.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So Rabbi say the Stipler wants to say, well, the Mishnah was written very concisely and very briefly, and not everything could be written down. It's hard to understand that answers the question fully. Especially we find a lot of different concepts in Mishnayos that are hard to understand. For example, there's a concept of Ein Seder LeMishnah. There's no order to the Mishnah. Why? What kind of concept is that? You have a concept of, Aniyim b'makom echad, v'ashirim b'makom achar. You want an explanation? Oh, you find it somewhere else. But here we leave it out. I mean, what kind of explain what you mean. So the Tfaris Yisrael, he explains the concept of Chisur Mechzer of Halachic Katani very interestingly, and that is the Tfaris Yisrael in Erechin Parak Mishnah Aleph. He says, you think it's easy to remember all the Mishnayos? It's impossible. How can anyone remember all the Mishnayos? What's the best way to remember something?
With a song.
With a song, right? I remember when my siblings was in elementary school, they knew all the states of the United States with their capital and their main products. How? They had a niggin. With the song, you can remember everything. Taisus and Masech the Megillah says b'Feiros, look at number 20, Lam Beis and Aleph. Hayiregilan l'shanes hamishnayis b'Zimra. They used to learn the Mishnah with song. Why? They used to learn it by heart. If you have a good tune, it's much easier to remember. Says the Tfaris Yisrael. You know what's Pshan Chisur Mechser V'Halachic Katani?
The song finished.
It didn't fit the beat. The words did not fit the
song
beat.
ended.
The
song ended, and they didn't have the words.
Not that it ended. Chisur Mechser is they're missing words. There's a certain niggin, there's a certain tune. The words had to fit the tune, and every seder had a different tune. The words didn't fit the tune. They had to memorize it. Very interesting. And he says, by the way, even though B'Roiv Pa'amim, there's a deeper answer.
Don't make it.
He says,
keep it simple.
if you can't find an answer, you should know this is a very good answer and it's true. It's amiti.
And
Any
it's
answer?
true too.
It's true too. So you have Taisus and Megillah. The Gemara in Be'ah Chavdad also says Gemara Gomer Zemarta Tehei that it was a song. Rabbi said, I want to share with you the reasoning of Rav Hutner. Rav Hutner writes from what?
Make a beat.
Beat. A song is not easy to
Not so simple.
Rabbi say,
Duple meter, triple meter.
Rav Hutner advances an amazing concept. I want to thank Rabbi Tzvi Merling for helping me find it. It's the Pachad Yitzchak is in the beginning of Chanukah, Maimer Aleph, and he says like this. There's one pasuk that says K'soy b'chas hadvarim ha'ela. One pasuk says you have to write down the Torah. One pasuk says Ki al pi hadvarim ha'ela. that these words have to be oral. So what does the Gemara in Gittin say? Dvarim shebechsav yatara shalom menapeh. Written Torah you're not allowed to say orally. Dvarim shebalpeh yatara shalom bechsav. Oral Torah you're not to write down. We're all familiar. There was a prohibition to write down Torah shebalpeh. The Gemara continues. Look at number 22. Amar Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi. Like Karas HaKadosh Baruch Hu Bris in Yisrael. God only sealed the covenant with Klal Yisrael Ela b'shvil dvarim shebalpeh. Shenemar ki al pi hadvarim ha'ela karati et chabris. In other words, if we were to ask, we know we're connected to Rebbeinu Shalom through Torah shebalpeh, through Torah. Which Torah? Torah shebechsav or Torah shebalpeh? The answer is we're connected through God through Torah shebalpeh. The bris is only through Torah shebalpeh. Why? Why? So Taisa says, look at number 23. Echtoiv loy rube tairasi. The pasuk says in Isaiah, I wrote for you the majority of my Torah, k'moizar nechshavo, but it became strange. What does this mean? Says Taisus, that once the Torah Shebechsav was written, we became strangers to God. You know why? Because Jews have the Torah Shebechsav, and Christians have the Torah Shebechsav, and Muslims have the Torah Shebechsav. So in what way are we unique to the Rebbeinu Shalom? And therefore, the implication is, that is why we're not allowed to write down Torah shebalpeh. Because if the Torah shebalpeh would be written down, what?
We don't want the other rumors to have.
Right, if the Torah shebalpeh would be written down, then who would have access to it? Everyone would have access to it. And then we would be strangers to God. So what makes us unique to Hashem? Torah shebalpeh. In other words, Rav Hudner says, we see from here that when we say the Torah shebalpeh is a bris between Klal Yisrael and the Rebbeinu Shalom, a bris is not just something that connects me and you. It's more than that. A bris is something that connects me and you that doesn't connect me or you to anybody else. Bris means exclusivity. It's exclusive to me and you. A bris is not just something me and you have in common. If me and you have something in common, and we also have it in common with everyone else in the world, it's not a bris. So bris doesn't just mean a connection between A and B. It means A and B and nobody else. So could Torah Shebechsav be a bris between us and Hashem? Of course not. Because everyone has a Torah Shebechsav. The only thing that's a bris between us and the Rebbeinu Shalom is the Torah shebalpeh. Because it's exclusive, and the definition of bris is exclusivity.
Not anymore.
What you're doing is...
But basically, it's only after the advent of their religions that the Hashgacha had it, that it was written down, so they were never able to adopt it.
No, what you're doing is equalizing the Christian and the Muslim religion to our Torah.
No, chas v'shalom. We're just saying that because they had access to the Chumash, they adopted it for themselves, and we lost the uniqueness that Torah would give us. Okay, so listen to the following.
So what's...
We make, questions after. We make 2 brachas HaTorah in the morning. Asher bach rabanu mikol ha'amim, and then brachat HaShem Asher nasa lanu Torah, right? Asher nasa lanu Torah asames, v'chayim lam tav zechenu. Fine. The Vilna Gaon says, what are these 2 brachas?
So we did write it.
The Vilna Gaon says, what are these 2 brachos? They're 2 separate achievements that Klal Yisrael attained. One was Asher Bach Rabanu. Asher Bach Rabanu has nothing to do with the fact that Hashem gave us mitzvahs and 613 mitzvahs in the Torah. Asher Bach Rabanu is what we call bris Torah. There's a concept. Aside from the fact that we have a Torah, that we have to keep the mitzvahs and we have to learn the Torah, it's a bris. The bris means it's between me and Rebbeinu Shalom, and no other nation has access to it. That's the first achievement of Kabbalas HaTorah. By the way, what date did that happen on?
Sure.
It happened when Hashem said, "V'yisem li segula mikol ha'amim," on Beis Sivan, the Yom HaMeyuchas. Hashem said, "I am making a covenant between me and you, and not the goyim." What the covenant was exactly? That we got on. That was the Nesinas HaTorah. That was a deal that Avram's going to get out of Yisrael, and he's going to have the children. But in terms of the uniqueness of Klal Yisrael to the Rebbeinu Shalom, that was on Beis Sivan. That was the bris Torah. That was the exclusiveness of the deal. And then the giving of the actual Torah was on Vav Sivan, on Shavuos. Says Rav Hutner, What's the reason why we were not allowed to write down Torah Sheba'al Peh? It's in order to maintain the exclusivity of the bris. In order to have bris Torah. It's not enough to have Torah, you need to have bris Torah. You need it to be exclusive. So ask Rav Hutner, if that's the case, then what right did Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi have to come along and write down the Torah? You're abolishing the exclusivity of the Torah. You're abolishing the bris. Did Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi nullify the bris that Hashem had with Klal Yisrael? How could he do such a thing? So says Rav Hutner, that is why, even when Rabbi Yehuda HaNasi wrote down the Torah Sheba'al Peh, he left out certain phrases. He wrote in a certain way where even if the Ummah Yisrael would take it, it would still be exclusive between the Baal and Klal Yisrael. So the concept of Chisur Mechsav Achiktani, it's not a matter of convenience, it's not a matter just of the tune, which may be true, but it's deeper than that. It's in order to preserve the special bris that the Rebbeinu Shalom has with Klal Yisrael. It's in order to preserve what we call bris Torah. And that is probably the primary reason why Torah Sheba'al Peh was not allowed to be written down. Why? It's in order for it to be for all eternity the krisas bris between HaKadosh Baruch Hu
But now
and Klal
that we
Yisrael.
wrote it down, why can't the goyim come and take away through that the bris?
They already established their religion.
Their religion is already formulated. It's already set.
How can we permit conversion? How can we permit someone to become a...
Talks about it. The Torah says it's
You could enter the bris.
Huh?
You could enter the bris. You could join the bris.
It's your choice to enter the bris. If we're chosen,
No,
we're
it's not
chosen
your
people,
choice.
you have no choice to enter the bris.
So that's the thing, that's the difference between Klal Yisrael and the other Ummah Yisraelim.
How can some of the Tanoim, some were converts? Some of the most famous.
Yeah, Rabbi Yaakov Kamenetsky says, you see from here, people say Judaism is racist, just the opposite. All the other nations of the world say, that's it. We're going to be in heaven and everyone else is going to be on the other side. And the Jewish people say, no, we're not any better than anybody else. We have certain responsibilities. You want those responsibilities? You can take those responsibilities also.
You can join up.
You could join up. We're not any better. We're not saying we're better than anyone. We are selected for responsibility. Anyone else who wants responsibility is welcome to share the burden. Rabbi Sai, I wish you a good Yom Tov.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.